There's a special kind of silence that hits a room when you realize you're being replaced by someone who thinks a pivot table is a trendy dance move. The CEO cleared his throat like he was announcing a prostate exam, not a professional betrayal. I'd barely sat down when he gestured toward a kid in a wrinkle-free suit and gelled hair so shiny it could blind satellites. Jessica, this is Ryan, my nephew. He just finished his MBA. The kid stuck out his hand like he expected a trophy. I'm excited to learn from you. Big fan of? Spreadsheets, he said like it was a foreign word. The CEO continued, he's going to shadow you. Learn the ropes. He needs someone sharp to help him grow into a leadership role. Which, translated from executive to human, meant babysit this smug larva while he ruins everything I've spent 15 years building. But I smiled, nodded, and said, of course. Happy to help. Because women like me don't roll our eyes in boardrooms, we weaponize patience. If you're still listening, bless your suspicious little heart. Only 10% of folks actually subscribe to hear the rest of these glorious train wrecks. So if you're enjoying the ride, hit that subscribe button and toss us a like. It keeps the team fueled with coffee and spite. Anyway, the first thing Ryan did was ask if we could change our project folders from alphabetical to vibe-based sorting. No, really. I thought he was joking until he pulled up a pastel-colored Kanban board labeled Big Brain Energy. He'd color-coded projects by cool factor. He put the flagship client under me because, and I quote, they don't use Instagram. But I bit my tongue, because this wasn't my first rodeo. I'd seen worse. Midlife crisis consultants who thought synergy meant wearing matching hoodies. I figured I could mold him, teach him enough real strategy that he wouldn't light the company on fire trying to reinvent PowerPoint. Maybe even turn him into a half-decent executive. And selfishly, I thought maybe, just maybe, mentoring the CEO's golden boy would secure my seat at the table for the long haul. So I gave him the good chair in client meetings, let him stumble through intros while I subtly course-corrected with a well-timed nod or follow-up. When he forgot to prepare the Q3 revenue forecast for $1 million proposal, I stayed up till midnight fixing it. No credit, no mention. Just a line at the bottom, compiled by R. Dorsey. People warned me. You're making yourself obsolete, a colleague whispered over coffee one morning, eyeing Ryan's name popping up on more email threads. If he's the future. Where does that leave you? But I brushed it off. He reflects on me, I said. If he rises, so do I. I didn't realize I was teaching a python how to crawl into my bed and strangle me in my sleep. Ryan got bold, started making decisions without looping me in, slid into meetings I wasn't invited to, then used my own language, verbatim, to pitch half-formed ideas I'd floated months ago. I noticed the shift when people started asking him questions they used to ask me, when he stopped taking notes and started answering them instead. Still, I stayed the course. 2 years. 2 entire years I played the long game. I cleaned up his messes, coached him through negotiations, even ghost-wrote entire proposals under his name because he said his personal voice wasn't coming through. That personal voice, a Frankenstein monster of LinkedIn buzzwords and stolen phrases from my old decks. But the real kicker, the moment I should have seen the guillotine swinging, was at the holiday party. The CEO toasted Ryan as our rising star, said he was transforming our approach to innovation. I stood there holding a plastic cup of warm Pinot Grigio while Ryan winked at me like we shared an inside joke. We didn't. It was just signaling that he'd gotten everything he wanted, and I hadn't even realized I'd handed it to him on a silver platter. That night, I stared at my ceiling fan spinning like a roulette wheel and wondered what kind of fool I'd become. I wasn't angry yet, not really. I was calculating. The kind of quiet you feel before a thunderstorm splits the sky open, because something told me this kid wasn't done. And when he made his next move, I'd be ready. I once rewrote an entire investor pitch while stuck in a Starbucks bathroom because Ryan, in his infinite wisdom, thought off the cuff meant showing up with zero prep and a 3-slide deck that included a gif of a dancing banana. That particular meeting was with a venture partner who could have doubled our funding pipeline. Ryan led it. I salvaged it. I smiled while he took credit and waved to the receptionist on the way out like he was Bono. He called it synergy. I called it duct tape on a dumpster fire. Week after week, I tightened the bolts behind his every success. His tone with clients used to be pure frat boy, too many bros, not enough clarity. I coached him out of that phrase by phrase. When he referred to our flagship client CFO as Debbie in a follow-up email, her name was Deborah, and she carried a machete in her tone, I called him into my office and said, flatly, if you want to be taken seriously, stop writing like you're texting your fantasy football league. He blinked, said, got it, and added an emoji to the next draft. I rewrote that one too. The first 6 months I chalked it up to mentorship, growing pains. He was green and I was the sharp edge meant to shape him. I taught him which numbers mattered in quarterly reports, what phrases calmed skittish board members, and how to navigate the minefield of passive-aggressive leadership emails. Even Ghost wrote his first company-wide memo. He told me he wanted it to feel visionary, like Steve Jobs, but, quote, not so dead. By month 9, he'd started ending sentences with per my last email, even when it was his first. and my inbox started feeling thinner. People were replying to threads I was never CC'd on, threads that were clearly based on strategies I'd spent months developing. When I asked Ryan about one, he gave a half smile and said, "Oh, I figured you were too busy to weigh in. Didn't want to bog you down." Bog me down? That was my project, my framework, my architecture that he was now confidently presenting as his own, decked out in pastel branding and self-assigned acronyms that made it sound like he'd invented synergy itself. I bit my lip, took the high road, again, because I wasn't about to torch the bridge I'd spent 2 years carefully walking across. Not yet. One morning, found a draft pitch deck on the printer, labeled Ryan Dorsey Vision 2026 Fina L Final V3, PPTX. Inside were slides I had built. Language I had written, my words, my structure, my strategy, all scrubbed of my name like I'd never existed. The only credit line at the bottom, presented by Ryan Dorsey, VP Strategy. He wasn't VP yet, but clearly in his mind he'd already arrived. Still, I let him present it. I even helped polish it the night before. Because I told myself he reflects on me. If he rises, so do I. That's what I believed. Or maybe that's what I needed to believe so I didn't feel like I was sharpening the knife he'd eventually plant in my back. Others noticed. My old colleague Ava, the kind who keeps receipts and snacks in the same purse, pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Jess, when are you going to stop writing love letters to the man planning your funeral?" I laughed it off, told her it was part of the plan, that building an ally in the executive suite meant playing the long game, that I'd get mine when the dust settled. But the dust never settled, it thickened. Ryan started forwarding client emails to our boss with his own commentary. My idea is getting traction. Happy to see my pilot resonating. Each thread, built on foundations I laid, calls I took, nights I spent stitching the pieces together while he hosted fireside chats with interns and posted about thought leadership on LinkedIn like he was running for office. And then came the HR roundtable. They were collecting anonymous feedback for leadership training. Ryan submitted a 5-page manifesto on modernizing outdated management styles. I saw it accidentally. Someone had printed all the responses for a summary meeting and left them in the break room. His words dripped with passive shade. Phrases like legacy thinking and lack of digital fluency. It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. It was clear. Ryan wasn't just stepping into a new role. He was rewriting the narrative of how he got there and erasing the woman who taught him how to fake it till he looked the part. And still, I said nothing, because I was waiting for the right move. And when it came, it wouldn't be loud. It would be surgical. The email hit inboxes at 8:01 a.m. on a Monday, the digital equivalent of a sucker punch served with a side of croissants. Subject line, exciting leadership news. I opened it in the elevator, halfway through my first sip of coffee, already half dreading whatever buzzword cocktail was waiting inside. And there it was, written in that polished, saccharine HR tone that tries to make a decapitation sound like a company picnic. We are thrilled to announce Ryan Dorsey as Vice President of Strategic Growth, effective immediately. Ryan has demonstrated exceptional vision and leadership over the past 2 years. 2 years. My 2 years. My proposals, my pilots, my deck templates with the fonts he never remembered to change. He hadn't just taken credit, he deleted me from the story altogether. Not a single line about mentorship, not a whisper of gratitude. I wasn't even CC'd. It was as if I'd been plucked out of the timeline like gum off a shoe. I walked into the office feeling like a ghost who could still smell toner and broken promises. People glanced up, then quickly backed down, the way you look at a car crash you're trying not to admit you enjoy. Some offered awkward congratulations, as if I'd been promoted too. Others just gave me those tight-lipped corporate smiles, the kind that say glad it's not me. By 9:30, Ryan's assistant pinged me. He'd like to meet. Brief touch base, as if we were still on the same team, as if he hadn't just clubbed me over the head with the velvet hammer of office politics. I stepped into his new office, a corner space that used to belong to a man who'd once built this company out of his garage and unpaid interns. Now it had a standing desk, faux succulents, and a whiteboard with the words "Disrupt or Die" scribbled in dry erase marker like a hostage note written by a TED talk. Ryan stood to greet me like a politician shaking hands with someone whose vote he didn't need. His posture was straight. His grin was thin, rehearsed. "Jess, glad you could come by," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him like he was offering me the last seat on a sinking ship. I didn't sit. He adjusted his cuffs like he'd been practicing this moment in a mirror. "Look, I want to be transparent with you. We're moving in a new direction, one that doesn't exactly align with your traditional approach." I let that hang in the air just long enough to make him twitch. He added, "It's not personal, just evolution. We're innovating, and that requires different energy." Different energy, I nearly laughed. The kind of energy that forgets to mute itself on Zoom while watching crypto TikToks mid-meeting? I said nothing. Just tilted my head and looked at him like I was trying to remember if I'd left the stove on, or if I was about to burn the whole kitchen down. "You've done great work here," he continued, tone all fake empathy and sterile warmth. "Truly. But it's time to give others room to grow. Others, meaning him, meaning the boy who once asked me what an RFP was while holding a caramel frappuccino like it was a diploma. I smiled, just a small one. The kind that lives between bless your heart and I dare you to finish that sentence. He mistook it for grace. I'll loop in HR, he said. We'll make sure the transition's smooth. You deserve that, smooth, like sandpaper down the spine. I gave him a single nod, turned, and walked out without saying another word. The silence echoed louder than anything I could have yelled. As I passed the receptionist, she looked up with wide eyes and the quiet fear of someone who'd just seen a lion walk through a daycare. I gave her the same slight smile. Because that's all I had left now. Silence, poise, and a plan already simmering like a bomb set to boil. The CEO didn't call. HR didn't reach out. My keycard still worked, but the air had changed, thicker now, with betrayal and bad cologne. No goodbyes, no thank yous. Just a slow erasure, pixel by pixel. But here's the thing about ghosts. Sometimes we come back with unfinished business. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't pour wine into a coffee mug and collapse into the couch like some sad trope from a Tuesday night drama. I walked into my house, took off my heels with the slow precision of someone defusing a bomb, made a single piece of dry toast, and opened my laptop like I was about to conduct surgery on a corpse that didn't yet know it was dead. The screen lit up and I felt it, the shift. That invisible tremor behind the ribs when something inside you locks into place. Not sadness, not defeat, something colder, sharper, a kind of purpose you don't come back from. I clicked into my personal cloud drive, quiet little folder named Backup. Strategy 2019-2023. Not company property, not hosted on their systems, because women like me don't get to have bad days. We get to have insurance policies disguised as admin diligence. First tab, emails, I sorted by sender. Dorsey Ryan, there they were, chains I'd forwarded to myself at 2 a.m. after cleaning up his messes, annotated with keywords like source mismatch, proposal integrity, client retention. Second tab, pitch decks. Versions with timestamps. Slides with my initials in the metadata. Strategy flowcharts I'd designed in hotel rooms at midnight while he was busy networking on rooftop bars. But it was the third file, the one I hadn't touched since last fall, that made me pause. Transfer Innovation IP. I opened it. Inside, the original concept paper I drafted nearly a year and a half ago. Data integration model for supply chain analytics that pulled from client-facing platforms in real time. Tech specs. Use cases. Deployment paths. Annotations from my conversations with a third-party vendor who had helped me explore licensing options before I ever pitched it internally. And then, layered over that, another file. Ryan's Vision 2026 proposal, the same one that got him his shiny new title. It was my architecture. Same use cases, same projections. Except he'd changed the name from Pulse Stream to Dorsey Flow, which frankly sounded like a urinary tract issue. But the kicker? The licensing clause. See, months ago, long before I ever handed that idea over to the company, I'd entered into a personal agreement with the external vendor. A placeholder licensing contract. One that assigned ownership to me, personally, for the pilot framework. I'd even paid the retainer out of my own consulting LLC, which I kept active on the side for speaking gigs and just-in-case moments exactly like this. I remember now. I hadn't wanted to move forward with it internally until I was sure it worked. So I'd kept the skeleton of the project in my back pocket. When Ryan begged for something disruptive to present during last quarter's Innovation Summit, I'd handed him the concept like a loaded weapon. I hadn't expected him to fire it directly at my job, but he hadn't read the footnotes, hadn't checked the contract terms, didn't know the vendor required explicit written release for public-facing deployments, and he definitely hadn't realized that in pitching it without vetting the source, he'd breached half a dozen internal protocols and at least one active NDA. I leaned back, let out a slow breath, and let the rage settle into my bones like sediment. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was building a case file. I spent the next 5 hours cataloging, comparing, highlighting every instance where my original language had been copy-pasted into Ryan's version. I ran it through a plagiarism scanner just for fun. 92% match. His title page had different fonts, that was about it. At 1:34 a.m. I wrote a memo, addressed to no one, just titled Ownership Summary. It laid out the timeline. Attached screenshots, licensing docs, email confirmations, metadata trails, everything. I didn't send it, not yet. I just saved it to a flash drive, then another. Then one more, which I hid in a hollow compartment of a hairbrush in my gym bag, a trick I learned from a risk management seminar I once gave to a room full of board executives who couldn't spell litigation if you spotted them the first 6 letters. Obsolete, am I? That night, I slept like a brick tossed into a lake. Not peaceful, just deliberate, because now it wasn't just about proving my worth. It was about watching him realize too late that he'd stolen the wrong woman's work, and she had the receipts. The summons came through Outlook, of course. No courtesy call, no hallway heads up, just a sterile little calendar invite titled Strategic Transition HR Conference Room B. 30 minutes, no agenda. RSVP requested. The kind of invite that smells like a firing and tastes like a knife wrapped in corporate jargon. I accepted with one click, didn't need to ask questions. I already knew what flavor of betrayal I was about to be served. I dressed sharp that morning, not flashy, just precise. Black suit, clean lines, no jewelry except the watch I'd worn the day I signed my first C-suite contract. The one engraved with a quote from my old mentor, never blink first. HR conference room B had a view of the parking garage, which felt about right. I walked in to find Ryan already seated, legs crossed, tapping on his phone like he was about to fire up a podcast about himself. The CEO sat at the head of the table, uncharacteristically stiff, fiddling with his pen. A laminated HR rep hovered by the door like a bad smell with a clipboard. Jessica, the CEO said, offering a nod that didn't reach his eyes. Thanks for coming. Ryan chimed in with his trademark artificial warmth. Hey Jess, he said like this was brunch and not a beheading. Appreciate you making the time. I sat, crossed my legs slowly, looked Ryan in the eye and waited for the performance to begin. He cleared his throat. We've been evaluating the current structure and moving forward, we believe the organization needs to evolve. Your contributions have been foundational, but we're streamlining, reallocating resources toward a more agile model. Agile, that word again. I'd heard it used to justify firings, budget cuts, hiring his girlfriend, even canceling the company holiday party once. Agile, the corporate version of it's not you, it's me. Ryan exhaled like he was about to drop something profound. We appreciate your service, but it's time for us to embrace forward momentum without the legacy infrastructure. Legacy infrastructure. I smiled. Not the kind of smile you give someone you like. The kind you give before you pull a lever and drop the floor out from under their feet. I reached into my bag and pulled out a plain black folder. No labels, no fluff, just thick cardstock and sharp edges. I slid it across the table to the CEO, slow and silent like I was dealing tarot cards to a man who didn't know he was already dead. This is for you, I said, meeting his gaze. Read it whenever you stop laughing. He blinked. Excuse me, you heard me. Ryan rolled his eyes and let out a smug little snort. Jess, come on, this isn't necessary. Let's keep things professional. I stood up, smoothed the front of my blazer, tapped once on the folder with my finger. That's professional, I said. What you're doing, that's reckless. The CEO looked down at the folder like it might explode. What is this? You'll see, I said, voice calm, razor flat. You'll see everything. And with that, I turned and walked out. No handshake, no tears, no it's been a pleasure. Just heels clicking across cheap laminate flooring, echoing down the hallway like a gavel striking wood. Outside the conference room, the office was quiet. Too quiet. Word had gotten around. I could feel eyes watching from behind cracked doorways and half-drawn blinds, the way people watch a building right before it collapses. No one said anything, but they didn't need to. The silence told me everything they expected me to break. To cry, to beg, but I don't beg, I prepare. I left the building like I owned it, because in a way I still did. My prints were on every system, my frameworks in every file, and the man they'd just anointed had no idea he'd been handed a crown built on stolen bricks, bricks I could yank out any time I wanted. In the parking lot, I paused by my car, looked back at the glass tower where I'd spent 15 years building, mentoring, fixing, and I smiled again, because now the countdown had started. And when the CEO opened that folder, he wouldn't just see my side of the story. He'd see the fuse, and it was already lit. The CEO didn't open the folder right away. At first, he just sat there, blinking at it like it had grown teeth. Ryan chuckled nervously and said something like, she's just trying to make a scene. Classic legacy playbook stuff. But his voice cracked a little at the end. He was trying to act like the alpha in the room, but his knee was bouncing under the table like a kid who just realized he filled in the wrong bubbles on the SAT. The HR rep, sensing tension that could ruin her lunch break, excused herself with the grace of a houseplant backing out of a murder scene. The door clicked shut, and the CEO finally slid the folder toward him. No words, just that quiet shift in energy that says something's coming. He flipped it open. First page, a printed timeline, tidy, color-coded, sourced. Jessica's original proposal, pulse stream, data-driven forecasting for dynamic supply chains. Dated, watermarked, authored under her personal LLC, not the company's letterhead. He turned the page, more documentation. Side-by-side comparisons of Jessica's strategy deck and Ryan's Vision 2026 presentation. Identical phrasing, identical structure. Charts mirrored right down to the spelling error on slide 6 that Jessica had left in the draft as a placeholder. Next tab, the licensing agreement. That's when his brow creased. The document was signed nearly a year ago. Jessica's name, the vendor's signature. Terms that assigned intellectual property ownership of the pilot framework directly to Jessica's LLC unless formally transferred, something that had never happened. He flipped again. Ryan's version. Same model, rebranded as Dorsey Flow, with a splash page that used the same image Jessica had pulled from Getty, watermark cropped, but still faintly visible if you looked hard enough. Then the contract excerpts, highlighted clauses Ryan never read. Confidentiality agreements, deployment restrictions, explicit requirements for external release, none of which Ryan had complied with. And then came the kicker, an email chain between Jessica and the vendor, dated 3 weeks prior, confirming that the licensing had not been transferred and any public presentation of the product was in direct violation of their agreement. The CEO exhaled slowly, leaned back in his chair, and tapped the folder with the back of his pen. His face didn't shift much, but the lines around his mouth hardened. Not surprise, not anger, something worse, recognition. He'd seen this kind of mess before, just never in his own house. From across the table, Ryan laughed again, weak, high-pitched. Come on, you're not taking that seriously, right? It's just a pile of PDFs. She's trying to cover her. The CEO held up a hand, not aggressively, just firmly, like you gesture to a dog before it peed on the rug. Ryan, he said quietly, go back to your office. I need a moment. Ryan hesitated, jaw working. With respect, I now, and just like that, the energy flipped. Ryan left, muttering something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like boomer paranoia. The CEO waited until the door closed again, then picked up his desk phone and pressed a single button. Hey, he said after a pause, it's me. We have a situation. He stood and turned toward the window while legal picked up. Yeah, I'm holding a licensing agreement in my hand that predates Ryan's promotion by a year. No, it's not ours, it's Jessica's. No, she didn't sign it over. And yes, we used it, publicly. He listened, nodded once. Tell me exactly what that exposes us to. Another pause, understood, start drafting the statement, and call our external counsel. Today, he hung up and stared out over the parking lot, arms crossed, one knuckle tapping the folder like a metronome, counting down to impact. Because this wasn't just plagiarism. This was a liability event. The kind that sends ripples through investor calls and quarterly earnings and board evaluations. The kind that gets people fired. And for the first time that day, the CEO smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just like a man who finally sees the full picture and knows exactly who not to trust moving forward. The boy he'd handed the keys to had just driven the car into a wall. And Jessica? Jessica had quietly handed him the dash cam footage. The headline dropped like a brick through a glass ceiling. Loud, sharp, impossible to ignore. Velocity Tech launches real-time supply chain forecasting powered by PulseStream, a game-changer developed by industry veteran Jessica M. It hit the wire at 9:07 a.m. on a Thursday, and by 9:12, Slack channels at our company looked like someone had lit a match in a room full of propane. People didn't message me, I was already out of sight and out of the building. But my phone buzzed with screenshots. Mentions, pings, even Ava, who never swore in text, sent me nothing but a row of fire emojis and holy. SHT. Ryan's name was nowhere in the article. Not a quote, not a footnote. But mine, it was everywhere. Jessica M., former strategic lead at Redacted Corp., has partnered with Velocity Tech to deploy a proprietary data framework years in the making. The reporter even included a pull quote from my keynote at last year's conference. Innovation without integrity is just branding. By 9:18, Ryan was pacing the corridor outside the executive floor like a raccoon trapped in a revolving door. Eyewitnesses later said he stormed into legal's office demanding an explanation, claiming sabotage, insisting that Jessica I must have stolen company property and handed it over to a competitor. He used words like espionage, breach, and according to one assistant, reputational terrorism. Legal stayed silent, because by then they'd seen the folder too. Ryan's version of events unraveled like wet toilet paper. Every question he answered spawned two more. Who approved the deployment? Who signed the vendor release? I hadn't due diligence caught the external licensing terms? And why exactly had a supposedly in-house product debuted under someone else's name, with notarized proof of concept dated months before he ever touched it? He cornered the CEO that afternoon, face flushed, voice too loud. We have to issue a correction. She's misrepresenting herself. This was our initiative. The CEO didn't blink. Just sipped his tea. He always drank tea when things went nuclear. You authorized a deployment, he said quietly, that you didn't own. Ryan blinked. But no one told me no one had to, the CEO said, voice flat as asphalt. You pitched an external framework to our board, moved it into prototype without legal, and then used our brand to claim ownership of intellectual property we didn't license. That's not strategy, Ryan. That's negligence. Someone close to the conversation said Ryan tried to laugh it off. Something about growing pains and startup hustle culture. But by then, it was too late. The board was already involved. Investor calls had been postponed. Internal emails had begun surfacing with subject lines like process breakdown urgent and Dorsey approval chain immediate review. His allies, quiet. His old mentor in marketing, on vacation and staying there. The junior analysts who once fought to be on his team started angling for transfers before their names got pulled into the vortex. Meanwhile, I was in New York. I'd been flown out for a sit-down with Velocity Tech's leadership. We toasted with champagne in a glass-walled office high above the skyline, while my old workplace sank below sea level in real time. The article was just the beginning. More stories followed. Industry blogs dug into my licensing deal. Thought leaders on LinkedIn started resharing my conference quotes, framing me as the face of ethical innovation. And Ryan, he became a case study, an unflattering one. Whispers started among clients. Wasn't that his team's project? Didn't she mentor him? Wait, is that the same Ryan Dorsey who tanked the pilot with Stratnet last year? The spiral was fast, violent, deserved, and the best part? I didn't say a single word. I let the paper trail do the talking. Let the contracts sing. Let the silence from legal hum like background music in a slow-motion implosion. Because while Ryan was busy printing his name on my ideas, I was busy printing business cards with mine. And by the time he realized he'd stolen a house built on sand, I'd already bought the beachfront next door. The board hadn't called me yet, but they would. They always do when the golden boy melts. They moved him to the cubicle by the printer. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. The same Ryan who once called himself an executive thought architect during a brown bag lunch was now wedged between a humming Xerox machine and the guy from IT who spoke only in acronyms. His new title, Project Integration Liaison, which translated from corporate to English meant, sit here, smile politely, and touch absolutely nothing. They didn't fire him, no, that would have been too easy. They left him hanging, stripped of authority, removed from client meetings, frozen out of strategy decks. His calendar dried up. His inbox slowed to a trickle of calendar reminders and unsubscribe confirmations. The only people who approached him were confused interns asking where the bathroom was. Coworkers stopped making eye contact in the break room. You could feel the energy shift when he entered, like someone just farted in an elevator. A few still said hey, Ryan in passing, but it sounded more like pity than respect. Even the HR manager who once defended his creative leadership style had started referring to his corner office era in the past tense. Back when Ryan was VP, meanwhile, I was in a ballroom at the Grand Hyatt in Chicago, standing under chandeliers that cost more than Ryan's Tesla lease. My keynote at the National Supply Chain Innovation Summit had been booked months ago, but now it had wait. I wasn't just speaking as Jessica from some corporation. I was Jessica M., the architect behind PulseStream, the woman whose name now carried a ripple effect across 5 industries and 3 boardrooms. When I walked on stage, the applause felt different. Not polite, not obligatory. It was the kind of applause you get when people know. When they've read the headlines and put the puzzle pieces together on their own. I opened with a line I hadn't planned. Sometimes the best ideas get ignored until someone else tries to steal them. That got a laugh, a real one. I talked about ethical innovation, ownership, and what it means to mentor from beneath while someone else gets lifted on your shoulders. I never said Ryan's name. I didn't need to. Every person in that room knew a Ryan. Some of them were Ryans, they just hadn't been caught yet. By the end, I got a standing ovation. Someone from Fast Company came up after and asked if I'd be open to an op-ed. I said maybe, depending on the deadline. My new employer had already suggested I limit public press until after the rollout, but they'd also offered me an equity stake. So, trade-offs. Back at my old company, things shifted in quieter ways. The CEO sent a company-wide memo. No fanfare, no finger-pointing. Just a new policy. All mentorship contributions would now be formally documented in performance reviews. Attribution would be required on collaborative projects. IP transfer protocols would be reviewed quarterly. The subtext wasn't subtle. Everyone understood what had happened, even if it wasn't spelled out. One line stood out in particular. We owe it to our mentors to honor their work before someone else claims it. The irony. Ryan was CC'd on that email. I wasn't, but I didn't need to be. I already knew. A week later, the CEO requested a private meeting with Ryan. Vague calendar title again, Executive Path Alignment. But this time, it wasn't just the two of them. A third name appeared on the invite. Mine. No last name, no company affiliation, just Jessica External Partner. Ryan saw it, according to the executive assistant. He stared at the screen for 5 full minutes before standing up, walking into the hallway and putting his forehead against the glass wall outside his old office. He stood there for a long time, just breathing, because he knew this wasn't just another HR slap on the wrist. This was the final chapter. And the woman he tried to erase was walking back through the front door, only this time not as his mentor, but as his equal, or worse, his reminder. The last meeting wasn't on the regular calendar. No Zoom link, no Teams invite, just a quiet email from the CEO's executive assistant to Ryan's inbox, 10 o'clock a.m. Conference room Delta, mandatory. Ryan showed up 5 minutes early. Pale, sallow really, like all the blood had drained south and decided not to come back. His tie was crooked, his hair looked like it had been styled by a blender, and the usual veneer of arrogance had cracked into something that looked like sweat. Inside conference room Delta, the lights were dimmed low, strategically or accidentally. No one ever confirmed, and the blinds were drawn. A pitcher of untouched water sat in the middle of the table like a stage prop in a corporate morality play. The CEO was already seated, alone. Ryan offered a weak smile. Morning. The CEO nodded once, not looking up from a thick printout on the table in front of him. A silence passed, 10 seconds, maybe 15, that felt like being held underwater. Then came a knock at the door. Ryan turned, and there I was. Black blazer, no bag, folder in hand. My badge clipped to my waist, not the old company logo, but my new one, Velocity Tech. I walked in, sat down opposite Ryan, and opened the folder with calm precision. Nothing performative, just clean movements. Surgical, the CEO finally looked up. Not at Ryan, at me. Jessica, he said with a nod, thanks for making the time. As you know, we're entering final phase negotiations on the integration partnership. Velocity Text Data Framework will be embedded across 3 of our primary business units, pending this final discussion. Ryan blinked, twice. His lips parted but no sound came out. I said nothing, just waited. The CEO picked up the printout, Ryan's old proposal, the bastardized version of mine, and began reading aloud. Not the whole thing, just the executive summary. The stolen lines, the ones I'd written in a hotel room 18 months ago while he was too busy networking at the rooftop bar to send in his notes. When he reached the line, designed to elevate logistics visibility through proactive forecasting and ethical machine learning applications, he stopped. Then he looked up, straight at Ryan. She didn't just mentor you, he said. She protected this company from you. There was a beat of stillness. And then the CEO did something no one expected. He laughed, not a chuckle, not a polite release of tension. A full-bodied, bitter laugh, like a man realizing just how close he'd come to letting a toddler drive a tractor through a minefield. It rang through the hallway, through the glass walls, out into the rows of desks beyond where heads turned and keyboards paused mid-keystroke. Ryan's mouth opened, closed. I didn't mean to know, the CEO cut in. You didn't mean to get caught, you didn't mean to overreach, but you did. And now the only question left is how quietly you plan to leave. Ryan stood blinking fast. You're firing me? The CEO nodded, almost amused. That's the part you're hearing. A long silence followed. Then, as if suddenly remembering I existed, Ryan turned to me. You're just here to gloat. I tilted my head slightly. No, Ryan, I'm here to invoice. The CEO cracked another smile. You'll be escorted out shortly. Security has your offboarding documents. Leave your badge, and your NDA has been reactivated, so choose your next tweet very carefully. Ryan didn't move, not right away. Eventually, he muttered something about lawsuit and board appeal, but his voice didn't even fill the room. It dribbled out like soda gone flat. I stood, closed my folder, and offered a single nod, 1 inch downward, no emotion. Just acknowledgement. Final, clean, and I walked out. Past the HR director standing just outside. Past the admin who'd once called Ryan visionary and now avoided his gaze like it might be contagious. Down the hallway where the laughter had echoed moments before, and where, for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't invisible. I didn't need a parade, or confetti, or even applause. Because I'd already won. Not with revenge, with record. Ryan had tried to rewrite history, but I owned the footnotes, and now, he doesn't even get a mention in the next chapter. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the Coffee Pot strikes again.